Hello and welcome to my little trip down road testing memory lane. Another Q&A video for you, and we've got some belters again. So without further ado, let's jump in. And the first one carries on the big chicken strip debate. If you remember in the last video, we spoke about chicken strips. And there's that kind of implication, isn't there, that if you've got chicken strips on your bike, on the road at least, it means you're not a very fast rider, but that's not always the case. And we kind of went through that. But this question is from Adrian NG986. Thanks very much for your question. I respect MN as an experienced motorcycle journalist. His response on the chicken strip question is as politically correct as his job allows, but I sense a hint of hypocrisy judging by the way he rides when he's on a test ride. As per usual, riders without chicken strips on street riding wear them with pride, as they trust that modern tyres, which offer superb grip on dry and safe conditions, while the others will always diss the subject as a non-event, but they secretly wish to the contrary. I'd like an off-the-record, buddy-to-buddy answer from Mr. Neves if the opportunity arises. Well, here's the opportunity. I think kind of judging by your comment is there's still a correlation between fast riding and not having chicken strips, which isn't really the case. I mean a couple of things there. Yeah, we ride quite swiftly on test rides at launches mainly. Not in the UK, there's just too many cameras and stuff, isn't there? And obviously we go flat stick on track. But what you see in pictures isn't always what you get when it comes to tests. You know, when we're riding for pictures, you're kind of riding in a very contrived way. You kind of go back and forward for pictures. There's a photographer standing on the side of the road and videographer sometimes, although you have to ride completely different for video. Because the whole doing static pictures or still pictures is to make you look like you're going fast when we're actually going quite slow. So for example, the trick to looking good on a bike around a corner for a picture is to go through the corner in quite a lazy gear, because lazy gears promote lean. If you took that sort of to the extreme, if you went through a corner in first gear, the engine's quite buzzy and it's spinning hard and it doesn't want to lean over very well. But if you went through in neutral where the engine's hardly spinning, it kind of pushes you wide and you get a lot of lean. So for a picture, if it's a third gear corner, I'll go through in fourth or sometimes even higher. And you kind of do this weird body position that you probably never would do on the road anyway. So we don't actually ride flat out on the road, but obviously we ride swiftly. But hand on heart, honest to God, I don't lean a bike over on the road. Just really because you don't have to. You can ride really, really swift without leaning the bike over. And I think the whole chicken strip thing's probably a kind of a fallout from the olden days where, you know, people didn't have a body position on the bike. They just sat bolt upright and just sort of leant in. I mean, I'm going back a bit, maybe 70s and 80s and before. And people's lines through corners were generally nice, big, smooth arcs. You know, these were the days before, you know, I'm talking a long time back, before bikes had more power than grip. So, you know, your old Nortons could just flow through corners with lots of lean, a nice big U line through a corner, and it'll all be fine. But things have moved on now, and you can get around a corner pretty fast without having to lean the bike over. So you can do that in two ways. Number one is to have a good body position. So if you lean your or point your arm into the corner or your elbow into the apex, bend your arm, the bike will stay more upright at the same given speed. So if you were following somebody who wasn't doing the body position, he would be leaning right over and you could go round behind him almost upright at the same speed. So that's number one. And then number two is taking more of a V line in corners. So the way that stops you leaning over too far is that you go into the corner kind of at an angle pointing towards the apex, but the bike's fully upright. Then when you get to the apex, you lean it over momentarily and then you pull it up and come back out in a V. You kind of go into the point and come out on the point. So that line stops you sort of spending too long in the corner when you've got like a big arc and you're in there for a long time. So I suppose that's why some people have got chicken strips and some people haven't. There's loads of other reasons, but yeah, I don't think it's shameful to have chicken strips on the road. I mean, it's a different story on the track. If you've got chicken strips on the rear of your tyre on the track, you know, if you want to go fast, you're not going fast enough. You can go as fast as you want on the track, can't you? You can just enjoy it on a track day. But you know, if that sort of thing worries you, and if that's your scale, I mean, even Pirelli a few years ago, they or maybe Metzeler, they put some gauges on the shoulder of the tyre to show how far you're leaning over. Sort of that perpetuates that myth, doesn't it, that using all the tyre is the right thing to do, and it is on the track, but definitely not on the road. So you know, off the record, you know, we can all ride pretty swift on the road and not have to lean the bike over. So you know, my bike's got massive chicken strips on the road, but I don't care. Anyway, thanks very much for your question, Adrian. That's fantastic. Right, next is from Gareth Holden 301. Thanks very much for your question. Do you think that older Neavesy would have avoided the young Neavesy's accident? Well, that's a very, very good question. I think yes is a simple answer. So when I was 24, I had a massive accident on the road. I've spoken about it on this video before. Smashed myself to pieces, couldn't ride for 6 years. And what happened was I was going up a road. Someone was coming down the road in a car, and as we drew level, they turned right into a side turning off the main road, and I smashed into the side of them. And I think I broke my legs on the handlebars and going over the cars and all sorts of stuff. The thing I would do different now is the fact that you shouldn't really trust anybody on the road. I left my safety in the hands of somebody else on that day. I was just assuming that as I was going up the road, the car would just completely come the other way. I didn't anticipate that they would turn. Now I would look at that car coming down and wonder if they're on the phone. Obviously they weren't back then, it was before mobiles. But I'd wonder if they're on the phone. I wonder if they would suddenly swerve into the middle of the road for no reason. I'd wonder if they would turn into that side junction. So that is the fundamental difference between me riding then and me riding now, just because, you know, as somebody who has to ride every day, like a lot of people who work on bikes for a living, you kind of got to ride really defensively. You've got to assume that everyone's out to get you and everybody's going to crash into you and every road surface is going to have you off. That's the way, you know, we stay safe when we ride every day. You can't leave anything to chance. So if I could turn back the clock as I was going up the road on that bike, I would assume that the car was going to run into me, basically. So, but that's a good question, and we've done loads of videos, MCN, about, you know, state of mind, that kind of stuff. If you check them out, and it's all about just trying to stay safe. You know, just stealth your way around on the road. Just don't let anybody really react to you badly. Assume everyone's out to get you, you know, that kind of thing. So that's what I'll tell my younger bad self. But thanks very much for your question. Next one is from 10bear5. It's an interesting one. How about trail braking through corners? This seems to be a new fad people are advocating. I understand it's a track technique, but what about on the road? Well, good question. So trail braking is when you are braking as you lean into a corner and you're trailing the brakes. And it's been around since people started riding motorbikes. So it's not a new thing. It's a very, very old established thing. And yeah, it is derived from track riding, where you want to more or less be on the brakes or the throttle everywhere on the track. Anything else is just a waste of time. So when you fly into a corner, you're scrubbing off speed as you get to the apex, you're trail braking, but as you're leaning, you're releasing the brake till you get to full lean, then you can get on the throttle. So there's that relationship between braking and lean. So if you're fully upright, you can go full brakes, and if you're full on its side, you can't have any brakes. So that's trail braking. So the reason it's kind of not taught by instructors on the road is because the idea of road riding is that you go into a corner with enough wiggle room, slow enough that you can react to anything. So you don't go flying into a corner because you don't know what's around the other side. You don't know if there's gravel on the road, you don't know if there's a car coming. You're just completely blind to the situation. But that doesn't mean you can't trail brake a little bit. So if you can see through a corner, I trail brake a lot, but not just with the front. I trail brake with the rear as well. And it's basically just to keep the bike kind of stable, it's to keep the bike pulled into the ground. If you, like you would be taught by an advanced instructor or whatever, go into a corner, brake, then let go of the brake when you're upright and turn in, the whole bike's kind of unloaded and it just wants to go wide. But if you're keeping the brakes on, you're pulling the bike into the ground, and dragging the back brake as well helps it turn. It's just like having a third wheel. It's incredible. Back brake is something I really started using a lot, maybe 10 or so years ago, and I just can't stay off of it now. It's an amazing invention. But yeah, you don't need to trail brake on the road. You can get away without it, but I think that you've got better bike control with it, especially if you give it a little dab of rear as well. But yeah, obviously only do it out on the open road if you can see around a corner. You don't need to trail brake around town or when you're going slowly or anything like that. But great question, thank you very much for that. Next is from Rage Rider 6283. Thank you for the question. Great video as ever. Thank you. Any bikes completely pass you by while you weren't riding for 6 years? Yeah, loads. So yeah, I didn't ride from 94 to 2000 because of my accident, and I kind of missed that whole. I suppose I missed the golden times really of modern classic superbikes and sports bikes. I would have missed the S-Rads of the world, the GSXR 600 and 750 S-Rad. I missed the first R1. I missed all the Fireblades that kind of went through that era. I missed the Ducati 916 of the time. I miss RC45s. Not that I would have ever been able to ride any of those bikes because I was just had a normal job and wouldn't have been able to afford it. I'm really lucky in what I do now because I can get to ride all the bikes. I've since ridden all of those bikes, all those 90s bikes, and they're fantastic. But what I really missed in that era was not being a motorcycle journalist. I think motorcycle journalism in those days, that's when they looked, anyway, like they had the most fun. When you look back at Superbike of the day, fast bikes, PB obviously, and MCM was huge back then as well. That's how we consumed our motorcycle media, wasn't it? Through the magazines and newspapers. And I'm sure, like me, many of you would wait a month for that next magazine to come along and absolutely devour it. And then you'd be, clicking your heels until the next month. Then you buy MCN every Wednesday, read that from cover to cover. That's how you got your sports news. Not everyone had satellite back then. So I wish I had been a motorcycle journalist back then. They looked like they had a lot of fun. There was a lot more silliness then that you're not allowed to get away with now. There's probably a lot more money sloshing around. Some of the features and stuff they did look absolutely amazing. But I think also at the time of my life, in my 20s, I think if I'd have been a motorcycle journalist, I probably would have got a bit too giddy with it and probably would have crashed my brains out. I think by becoming one in my early 30s, I was still a little bit like that, but that's probably saved my skin. Everything happens for a reason. But I used to read even when I couldn't ride. I used to keep up with all the cool bikes of the 90s, and there were some absolute stonkers there, wasn't it? I mean, what's your favourite 90s bike? Answers on the back of a postcard. So thanks very much for your question. Right, next one from the Fat Haggis 1730. Thanks for your question. Hi Michael, love the channel, thank you. My question for you is, how do you stop yourself getting too attached to your motorcycles? I'm at the point now where I know I should make room for new things, but struggling to say goodbye to my current lineup. I should point out that one was my first big bike I've kept for years, an NC30. I can just about see that in your profile picture. Another one was one I always wanted, and one was a family hand-me-down. I know this won't seem too bad for some, first world problems, right? But should I stop being sentimental, sell up and move on? Or keep adding to the list and hope the missus doesn't notice? Keep up the great work. Well, very interesting question. Number one, how do we stop ourselves getting sentimental? I think one of the drawbacks of being a road tester is that you don't really ride socially anymore, apart from when I do holidays and stuff or track days, but I never really go out for a ride, and I don't have my own bike. I had a T-Max a few years ago and sold it during lockdown, so I don't really have the same sentimental attachment to bikes that I used to before I was a road tester, and that's a little bit of a shame because that kind of part of riding is missing for me now. You know, that warm glow when you open a garage door. I mean, I open my garage door to some real cool stuff, but they're just test bikes that you've got to give back, and you're kind of forced to think about them in a very analytical way, which is also why we don't really have favourites when you're road testing. You know, people say you bias towards certain brands. Well, you're not. It ends up becoming, you know, it's a motorcycle that you test, and you've got to be quite cold-hearted about it. I mean, they do talk to you. I mean, every bike makes you feel different, and that's what inspires you to write in a certain way about bikes. That's what makes the job continue to be interesting. You know, sometimes, you know, back in the day you were faced with 5 600cc super sport bikes, and you think, well, how am I going to say the brakes are different in 5 different ways, or whatever, describe the brakes in different ways. But they all have their own character, and they all talk to you. And, you know, whether it's a scooter or a Harley or a MotoGP bike or anything in between, they're all little characters, but I don't get emotionally attached. So, but I can sympathise with where you're coming from with your bike collection, and it is first world problems, lovely problem to have. But what I would say to you is, anyone I know who's sold a bike that they love and that's got some kind of sentimental attachment because they think they should, has always regretted it. I know people who've bought back their bikes. I'm sure you do. So if I were you, I would keep hold of your bikes, and maybe, if you can, add to your collection. But brilliant question. Thank you very much. Next, from 1308 Lee. Here's a question. Thanks for your question. I hope you can help with. I've always ridden sports bikes. I'm not confident or comfortable on sit-up bikes. My girlfriend wants to come out more. What would be a good sport bike for 2-up riding that I can also knee slide, wheelie and take on track? I was leaning towards a 2009 Fireblade or 2007 ZX-10R. Can you shed any light on a comfy-ish pillion sports bike? We'll consider a small bike as well as thousands. I'm not sure if the ZZR 1400 or Hayabusa are a bit too big and clumsy. Interesting question. So, yeah, the big boosters of the world are a bit heavy and clumsy. I mean, you can take them on track days. You can do whatever you want with them. But I would say, yeah, comfortable sports bikes don't really exist. A 2009 Fireblade is very cramped. It's got quite a small pillion perch. Same goes with the ZX-10. I mean, the most roomy of all of those bikes, really, back in the day. They're all quite cramped. Ducatis are always pretty roomy, but they're not really touring bikes. I mean, I would say try something sit up and beg. I mean, the glaringly obvious answer to your question there is some kind of super naked. You know, if you're kind of looking at mid to late noughties, you know, you've got speed triples, you've got Tuonos, you've got KTM Super Dukes, you've got, that's a bit too early for Ducati Street Fighters, You know, you've got those super nakeds, which are fantastic. They're pretty comfortable. They're not too set up and beg. They've still got quite sporty riding positions to put a little bit of weight over the front. They're fantastic. You've got bikes like the SMT KTM, the 990, the original, which is absolutely brilliant. You know, that's actually based on their old Supermoto, so it's now a Larry bike that's kind of been calmed down just enough to be practical. And that's really comfy. That you could take that on a track and be in the fast group, no problem at all. And then of course you've got kind of the more modern versions of those. You've got the superbikes on stilts, you've got the Multistradas, you've got the XR BMWs, you've got the KTM GTs, and they're all really, really capable sports bikes on the road and on the track, superbike performance. So what else is there? You know, there's Ninja 1000 SX or Z1000 SX, which are the older ones. You know, that's sporty. You can take that on track. It's a little bit soft, a little bit heavy, but you can do it. Obviously, that's much more comfortable and that's got more of a sporty riding position. But I would say get yourself on a super naked and see what you think. You'll be blown away. It'd be life changing. But let me know how you get on. Thanks very much for your question. Right, this one is from Matthew White. Hi Matthew. Hi Neezy. Keep up the great content. Your videos are great, covering many aspects of the motorcycling world. Thank you very much. I own a 2014 S1000R. As much as I've considered changing or upgrading the bike, I still love it and it still ticks many boxes, so I don't see the point in changing yet. I've recently moved to West Wales, so the bike does a 45-mile commute, not in the winter, and a good 100-mile general ride out exploring glorious Welsh roads. What tyres do you recommend? I'm currently running Rosso 2s, so that's Pirelli Diablo Rosso 2. But after listening to some of your videos, I'm wondering if a sports touring tyre would last longer and still give enough grip. Thank you. Well, so the Rosso 2s you're running are kind of that middle rung of tyres that sit between a sports touring tyre and a fast road stroke track day tyre. And I suppose with a tyre like that, you're going to probably get 3,000 or 4,000 miles at the rear, something like that. You know, the modern version of that is a Rosso 4. Then you've got in the same bracket, you've got a Metzeler Sportec M9RR, got a Bridgestone S22, you've got Michelin, I don't even know what the Michelins are. Michelin got such a confusing range. And you got Continental Sport Attack, I think. But anyway, I think if you want more mileage, a sports touring tyre will be more than good enough. I mean, you don't really need any more than a sports touring tyre on the road. They've evolved to a point where they have really sporty steering. They've got fantastic grip. They obviously last a long time. You might get like 5,000-6,000 miles out the rear, obviously depending on how you ride. And yeah, fantastic in the wet and the cold. I mean, the only disadvantage of a sports touring tyre is they generally got flatter profiles, so they're sort of slightly slower steering. And because they're so durable, it basically means they've got more rubber on them, so the tyres are a little bit heavier. But, you know, if you were to put any new generation sports touring tyre on, you're not going to have a problem at all, and you know that the bike is just absolutely good to go. Even on cold tyres, you can almost lean it onto its foot pegs if you wanted to. You know, and you've got to wait on a sports tyre for the tyres to warm up, but you don't on a sports touring tyre. So I would say, you know, if mileage is a worry, then definitely get a sports touring tyre. If you're not as worried and you sort of want a little bit more performance, get something similar to your Rosso 2s again. But I wouldn't go any higher. Sort of the higher level tyres are things like Diablo Rosso Corsa 4, Bridgestone RS11s, and then above that are Super Corsas and Race Techs and that kind of stuff. So yeah, give the sports touring tyre a go, because you know, in the spring and in the autumn you get cold days as well, and you know, they'll be good to go straight away. They're really, really good. But thanks very much for your question, Matthew. Right, this one's from Justin. Thanks very much for your question. My question for you Nice bit of kit there. I guess you're talking about the helmets. Thank you. Life without bikes is like having no salt and vinegar on your chips. Well, absolutely. My question for you, has anyone had issues with the electronically controlled shift cam versus mechanical stroke centrifugal version on the GSX-R 1000R? How do they compare, i.e. throttle pickup, burst of power, smoothness, etc., as you've rode both the Beamer and the Suzuki? Never miss a video and enjoy your content. Keep up the great work. Thank you very much. Well, I haven't heard of any issues with either of those variable valve systems, which basically give you the best of both worlds. You've got calm valve timing at low revs to give the engine grunt and torque, and then you've got kind of more leery valve timing at high revs that gives you your monster power. I've run shift cam on my racing bike since 2020. I've had no problems at all with it. It's actually a really good system because it gives you nice grunt out of the corners. I had a GSX-R 1000R as a long-termer in 2017. No problem with either system. They're both very, very smooth. And you know, it's very easy to sort of sit here in the cold light of day and think, okay, well, you know, on the GSX-R, the variable valve timing kind of changes high up in the revs, maybe 9,000-10,000 revs, something like that, and gives you the boost of power. On the S1000RR, the shift cam changes at 9,000 RPM, and you think, oh, I wonder if I'm going to feel a step in the power. But the reality is, when you reach those kind of revs on a superbike, you are hauling, you are going quick. The world is whizzing by. You've got a lot of wind noise, you've got a lot of violence from the bike, you've got a lot going on, and to be honest, you can't really feel the transition. All you feel is you're going from extremely fast to warp speed, and all of that happens in a matter of seconds, because you know, if you are dipping into the higher revs of a superbike, you've got the throttle pinned and the revs just go through the dial double quick. So you don't really feel that step, you know, not like people would say back in the day with VTEC on a VFR, for example. You know, you can feel the step because it happens at low revs and you're not really going that fast. But on a superbike, you can't feel it, and it's a really, really good idea. You know, interestingly, with my BMW race bike, there's also the option to have twin throttle bodies. So you can go kind of just flat out of the corner without having too much power. And it kind of takes away all the advantages of shift cam, really, as well as being really vibey when it's working. So we tried that for a little while when I was racing, and just went back to the normal 4 throttle bodies working together and using the benefits of shift cam. You know, when you come out of a corner, it just flies off. Not as good as an R1. An R1 is the king of coming out of corners because the way the cross-plane crank engine works and the power delivery, an R1 superpower is from the apex to the edge of the curb. It just absolutely goes, and it's easy to ride for that reason. You know, normal 4 cylinders are a little bit more aggressive, but the shift cam works fantastically. But as far as I know, they are very reliable and you've got nothing to worry about. Same goes with the shift cam in the Boxer engines in the GS, etc. Again, you don't really feel a transition. It's very, very smooth. It just gives the engines a really lovely broad spread of power. But thanks very much for your question, Justin. Right, 2 more. This one's from Liam Marsden. We had a Liam Marsden working at MCN actually. You the same, Liam? Hello, Mr. Neves. Hello, Liam. If you could ride one bike at one location, what would it be and where? Any bike, any location, regardless of how unrealistic. Good question. Well, you know, I've ridden some bikes in some fantastic locations and fantastic bikes. I'm extremely lucky. You know, that's one of the reasons I pinch myself every morning when I get out of bed and go to work, because we get to do some absolutely amazing things. You know, we've ridden MotoGP bikes at amazing Grand Prix tracks. We've ridden prototypes, Exotica, all over the world. But my kind of dream, if I could drop myself into a dream scenario, would probably be quite disappointing to you. It would be to be somewhere nice and hot on a little sort of, I don't know, either on the Amalfi Coast or Ibiza or the Panoramica Road that goes from Riccione to Pesaro near where Rossi is. You know, that kind of environment on a scooter. Doesn't even have to be a T-Max. I mean, some of my most sort of treasured biking memories is just kind of knocking around on a scooter in the sunshine, shorts and t-shirt and a piss pot. But obviously you cut the cloth to suit. You're not trail braking, that's for sure. And it's just that ultimate sense of freedom, you know, riding somewhere like that, looking at the sights. I think, you know, in the position I'm in now with the job that I do, that's the thing that would appeal to me the most, because I get to do all the cool stuff. When this dream finally ends and I get to stop eating birthday cake every day, then I'm sure that would revert into riding a Superleggera around Mugello, or riding Mick Doohan's NSR 500 at Suzuka or something like that. But right here, right now, riding a scooter around a little sunny coastline would be my dream. But there you go. Thanks very much for your question. And finally, from Solo Dingo, what a lovely name. A question: are these modern super high BHP sports bikes unrideable without electronics for mere mortals? Ooh, good question. Thanks very much for your question. Well, yes and no. I think by electronics, I think you mean rider aids. So things like traction control, wheelie control, that kind of stuff. But I think it's deeper than that now. And you only have to look at BSB for kind of proof of this. So BSB bikes, if you didn't know, have control electronics. So there's no rider aids allowed. There's no wheelie control, there's no launch control, there's no traction control. I think they've got quick shifters, probably about it. I think they're allowed some engine braking control in their software, maybe, I'm not sure. But they all manage to fly around in formation, largely not crashing. I mean, you don't really see many high sides at BSB, you know, and that's despite the tracks being quite gnarly, tracks often being quite cold, quite slippery. So you think to yourself, well, how do they do that? But the trick to making a good superbike nowadays, whether it's the road or the track, is all about the engine maps, the throttle maps. So for example, a BSB bike will be mapped so the power isn't too aggressive in the first few gears. So for example, and I've been lucky enough to ride world superbikes and all sorts before, and one of the things you notice straight off the bat is how soft they are at low revs. So, you know, they basically only give you the power you need to come out of any given corner. Maybe just a tiny little bit more, just so you've got the option just to slide a little bit. But you certainly don't have full fat power in the first few gears. You know, even the top riders in the world don't want that, because they want a bike that's nice and easy, and then by the time the bike's upright, then they can give it full power. So, you know, that's the trick that manufacturers are doing with their new superbikes now. So if you look at, say, for example, the new S1000RR or the new Panigale V4 or even the Street Fighter V4, the big thing with them is that they're quite soft at low revs. So you don't need the rider aids. So you don't need masses of wheelie control. You don't need masses of traction control, because it's kind of prevention is better than cure. So in a way, mere mortals can ride bikes with no electronics if the bikes are mapped the way they are now. Having said that, if you were to, as some people bizarrely do, go to get your new Panigale mapped so it's got full power in all the gears, and then turn the electronics off, then it would be a different story. You know, then the bikes would be an absolute, they'd be wild. I mean, you only have to look at a 2008 Panigale V4. Before the electronics were as refined as they are now, that was wild. You know, the first Panigale V2s were wild. And yeah, they just didn't have electronics to calm them down. But from a mapping point of view, not a traction control point of view. So it's interesting, but it all goes to show that bikes have sort of got too much power, because, you know, superbikes have got well over 200 bhp, and all the engineers now are doing is making them more docile again so we can ride them. So it's very interesting. But yeah, you jump on a 2023 S1000 or a Panigale, and they're surprisingly docile until they kind of, you know, get going in the higher gears, and they're proper brutish superbikes. And the trick is hanging on to them, because, you know, they deliver so much acceleration that you can use, so much braking power, so much cornering power. They absolutely rinse you after a few laps, and you know, you need to be superhuman just to hang on to them. But yeah, that's the good thing about electronics. That brings this video to a conclusion. Thank you very much for watching. Keep your comments and questions rolling in, and I'll see you soon.